Hello there, people, listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Matt Kelly onto the podcast. Matt is a designer and an entrepreneur and founder of Spacegoods. He's also the host of the Midnight Pod. Matt was the founder of a group of 6 to 7 figure online D2C websites and brands, which he set up after he dropped out of university from a burger bar. This was between 2017 and 2019. After that, he founded Midnight City, the jewellery brand, grew that to six-figure business. He exited the business in 2021. 7-figure, I should say. Yeah. In 2021, he founded Neon Beach, an LED neon brand, which he created from his laptop, turned that into 7 million revenue with a team of 40 designers remote. Hopefully I've got that right as well, mate. And is now the founder of Spacegoods, which is a wellness brand and a coffee replacement using mushrooms. I'm actually loaded up on the stuff now, and you guys very kindly sent me some. It's a banging product. Like, I've been smashing it back, not getting the jitters from usual coffee, and kind of a slow, nice energy. So thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
All good.
So what I love is your one sentence line. I think it really speaks to me as well, which is the creative pursuit of a greater self. I really like that, and I think I try and live my life through that with this podcast, with writing. But I'd love to know, like, what in one sentence is your definition of creativity?
Well, firstly, I'm really good at these cringe, fucking romanticized slogans that somehow just stick. But because I'm not trying to be a really boring brand, I just stick them all over the product. So, like, another one I came up with is "Nothing exists until you create it," which was like the name of this 80s movie we made, which I suppose is probably the most creative thing I've ever done. I think was making that movie, which is really pointless for marketing a D2C brand, but it's kind of partly why I did it, because most of marketing is actually really boring and sadly very plain. So I suppose creativity, I think it's doing shit your own way and not just falling foul of copying what everyone else is doing, which is what I do genuinely believe 99% of brands do. And actually probably ones that are way more successful than me also do a lot of that. And maybe that makes a lot of sense because you're copying and emulating things that work. Whereas at least with this brand, I do genuinely think I've done something a bit different. And most brands in the space tend to lean one way. You know, they're brown, black, white, cream, very literally vanilla. Whereas I've just tried to ruffle a few feathers and do it differently. Like, it looks a bit illegal. It's pink. Call it rainbow dust. It's all a bit over the top and tongue in cheek. Which maybe means maybe I'm going to have to pivot away from that if I want to scale it to where I'd like to. I don't know. Maybe it's not mass market enough being so niche, like visually. But I suppose that is creativity to me. It's like actually coming up with something that is objectively new and doing it in your own way to some extent. And yeah, I definitely haven't figured it all out. But I think at least with the first product, well, our first main product, it's pretty creative. And yeah, maybe.
It stands. And I think what you so rightly said is it stands out. I don't know where I've listened to quite a lot of podcasts and prep for this, but you said our product stands out like a sore thumb in a good way. And I think it is so. When I saw the branding, it is so different. And the fact, like, on a Holland & Barrett shelf, as you say, it's all fucking creams and bland, and this stands out so vividly. I think a big part from everyone I've interviewed is they say, like, a brand is the extension of a formidable founder. It's like the shadow of a formidable founder. It's a David Ogilvy quote. What part of your soul has gone into that brand in this Spacegoods?
Yeah, I think I've always been obsessed with, like, synthwave and pink lights. Like, it's funny, every flat I've ever lived in, I've always been known as the guy that never has bright lights and at nighttime has 15 fucking purple or pink neon signs. And I did used to have an LED neon sign business, which went very big and went very wrong, which we can maybe get onto. I don't know how much we're going to cover on that, but that was one step in the direction of creating stuff that's pink and beautiful. And I don't know, I've always been into, like, movies, and I find most of life very mundane and quite difficult to deal with. So maybe adding colour and like I listen to a copious amount of music that's probably like really unhealthy. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, I suppose I've always felt drawn to a late night pink kind of aspirational, romanticized aesthetic, whether that's anything to do with mushrooms or not. And then I just applied it to a product that I thought was interesting that I made for myself, really. So arguably I'd be a better film director than I am like D2C founder, even though I've never made a movie. But I've always just felt drawn to like cinematic shit and stuff that escapes reality to some extent, like visually. I don't know if that makes any sense. I probably sound like
It does, and I like it because what you said there is you're approaching this brand more like a film director. I know you're not, but like the input into the brand is so different from every other supplement product that it looks completely different. Do you know what I mean? And I think so many people, as you said, every other brand looks the fucking same, does the same fucking thing, and it just looks bland. It doesn't look an actual brand that stands out.
Yeah.
What you said you listen to a copious amount of music. What sort of music do you listen to, and what sort of films do you watch? What sort of films have been the inspiration for the brand, do you think?
I think when I'm working on brand stuff, I mean, I have a very eclectic taste in general, but a lot of synthwave stuff. So like I love a band called The Midnight, which is maybe where I got the Midnight Pod from. They're like an LA based like synthwave duo, and the music I used in the early film was actually like an instrumental from their shit. I might get in trouble for using that, but it's not exactly that famous. So like stuff like that, I love. I love bands like the 1975. I mean, I like romantic shit, basically, stuff that makes me feel like I'm in a movie. In terms of actual movies, I'm obsessed with horror films, which is probably, even though most horror films are shit, I'm just obsessed with horror films. Like I have this idea of somehow doing a product campaign where I get to wear a prosthetic zombie outfit and somehow make that relevant to selling supplements. So try to figure that one out. I got really into like the 80s aesthetic with the movie Drive with Ryan Gosling, which is like 2011, I think. So anything that's like nighttime 80s aesthetic, I would say. There's a theme here. I think I was born in the wrong era. But yeah.
I was going to say, where does that, because it is a consistent theme across everything you've done in the research I've done, right? Where would you say that comes from? Because you grew up in York, you grew up in like the north of England. Would you say that's got like an impact into how you became obsessed with like the razzle dazzle of LA and the...
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe I just always felt drawn to something that felt like really unrealistic and fantastical or whatever. Because I had such just a normal kind of boring upbringing, like most people, just like middle class, state school, never saw anyone that really created anything. I don't know. That probably sounds really cynical, but I always call myself like a cynical optimist. I don't know if I get that from being northern and always having a chip on my shoulder, but then also wanting to create cool shit. Also, like I traveled a lot when I was like in my early 20s. I was like a full-time nomad, so I don't know if I got inspiration from that, but like palm trees, sunsets and shit I've always felt drawn to, which is kind of ironic when I live in London, which doesn't really have any of that ever. Yeah, I really don't know. I've always felt that, and I've got a twin brother who's nothing like me, who probably would never even think about these things. So there's an argument that it was like nurture rather than nature, and I don't know. Maybe I had an experience on mushrooms many years ago, and maybe that altered my perception of the world, but it's hard to define.
Because what you've said is like Spacegoods is the kind of the first iteration or first product to launch, and you think, is correct if I'm wrong here, but that in microdosing in the future will be something that you can eventually sell. Am I right in saying that, if I've got that research right? Like
yeah, you are. That's where it all came from. It came from, I didn't sit down and go, oh, I want to build like a consumer supplement business. Like the initial idea was, I think psilocybin and microdosing will be the biggest thing ever to happen in the wellness industry if it becomes legalized. And it's probably going to take 10 to 20 years, and it's probably going to be in a pharmaceutical setting before it's ever allowed to be sold D2C on a Shopify website. But that was like the grand idea. And I thought, well, this space, and then mushrooms, functional mushrooms, not magic mushrooms, is kind of a first step in that direction, and building a brand that looks a bit psychedelic and implies going down that route could be a cool way to build a product. And the actual idea for Rainbow Dust was I wanted to create a legal alternative to a psychedelic microdose. So ingredients that collectively imitate the effects of a microdose. That was my idea. In other words, it's a mushroom coffee, right? Or a coffee without the anxiety is probably the friendliest way of describing it, the most easily understood. But yeah, it does feel similar to a psychedelic microdose, which I've done many times myself. And I just created the product for me, really. Because obviously you can't sell Class A drugs on the internet for very long. At least I didn't plan on doing that. So I created a supplement that ultimately, that's kind of how I thought about it and positioned it. Although, there's a million problems that come with that, because you can't even have the word psychedelics on your website if you want to run like Instagram ads, which is basically where I built the business. So kind of frustratingly had to move away from that exciting, like change the world narrative to just be like, all right, how the fuck do we sell more mushroom coffee? Well, we probably have to position it as a coffee replacement or coffee upgrade, which is what we do. So yeah, it started with the whole idea around psilocybin and psychedelics, but I actually frustratingly can't really speak about that like customer facing, because it just doesn't fly in terms of running ads, which is how you build a supplement business. So yeah, I've had to be quite pragmatic about how I approach it, because yeah, I've got this grand vision of change the world with psilocybin, but I also need to have customers and grow revenue. And if you're going to have investors and so on, they're probably not going to like you selling Class A drugs on the internet. So there's a bit of an irony in it all.
That's your cynical optimism, I think, mate. Having the big, grandiose vision of, I think ultimately it's going to be a big, from what I've read and listened to, I know Tim Ferriss is a big proponent of microdosing. I know I think he's invested a shitload into it from what I gathered. With some of these mushroom experiences, how would you say, is there a specific mushroom experience which has unlocked your creative pursuit of the greater self? Because I've listened to, again, other podcasts where I think I listened to one with James Smith, or it might have been Chris Williamson, actually. I don't know if you know those podcasters. Yeah. And they said they'd had these mushroom experiences and their like whole view of everything changed. What's been that for you?
I'd like to say there was some really romantic specific time where that happened, but I wouldn't even say there has been. I mean, I've definitely had many experiences on mushrooms over the years. I've always thought it was very profound and much better than any of the other substances which people can legally consume on a daily basis, i.e. alcohol, which I think plagues a lot of our society, even though I still drink it. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't pinpoint a specific time or experience. I think it's just been a more gradual intrigue in going down the rabbit hole of, first I took mushrooms in Amsterdam years ago, like a lot of people, in truffle form. And then I got interested in microdosing, which for anyone that doesn't know is taking a subperceptual portion of a psychedelic substance to experience very subtle effects, basically. Typically kind of easing depression, anxiety, helping people deal with certain shits that they couldn't otherwise deal with. So yeah, I've had a few experiences, but probably not as many people would think, given I'm trying to spearhead like a global mushroom transformation. I should probably go and do ayahuasca, then I'd be more qualified to speak about this and run this brand. But honestly, yeah, I've just done mushrooms a handful of times and always enjoyed it. And then I've microdosed more regularly, which I thought was very good. But yeah, it's illegal, so you can't really talk about it, which is also a bit of a difficulty with this topic because so many people are doing it and it's a bit of a grey area, but it's technically illegal, even though it's not going to do any harm to anyone. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I lost you there slightly. No, I think well, yeah, as I say, Tim Ferriss has been like betting the house on it being the kind of the cure to all for veterans coming back from the war, for all of PTSD and stuff like that. When you said it helps you work through shit that you couldn't work through otherwise, how?
Well, the basic science of psychedelics and psilocybin in particular is that it essentially allows your mind to break out of stuck thought patterns. That's kind of one way of putting it. Like if there's lines in the sand that you can't get rid of, negative self-talk, whatever, it allows you to create new ones. Like neuroplasticity is essentially like the benefit of psychedelics, which allows people to view things differently and think about things differently. I guess for me, like when my previous business fucked up, which was the neon light one, and I had to put it into administration in March 21 when I was 25 and didn't have any investors, that was a fuckload of emotional pain to deal with. And that's when I really got interested in microdosing for the first time and started doing it. And I found it very helpful. Because I think that was probably the roughest experience a mid-20s bootstrapped entrepreneur could go through. And I've probably downplayed it on a lot of my podcasts and so on. And the first ever podcast I made was actually speaking about that experience, which was very therapeutic and probably helpful. But that was really when I went into the rabbit hole of microdosing, and I guess kind of adaptogens and nootropics and ingredients for wellness more generally. And that's ultimately why I got into this space and started building the business. I'd left my previous two businesses largely because one of them went tits up and I had to put it into administration and got bought out. But then also because I was going to move on to something anyway and do the next thing, because I've always been a founder, but I wanted to do something that was maybe a bit more positively impactful on the world rather than just selling fucking Chinese necklaces forever, which there's nothing wrong with that. I know plenty of people that do that and it's potentially an even bigger market. But at least with this, I feel like I'm creating something that is like net beneficial for society. And granted, it's only a mushroom coffee, some people would say, but I get messages every day saying, people have cured their anxiety or, it's helped their ADHD a lot and so on. So
as I say, like I'm a coffee fiend. I'll bang through so much coffee, and I've been basically taking out 2 coffees a day and having this, and it is just a smooth, calm energy, and it is a banging product, and it does give you the creative impetus for sure. Just to click on that point in time, and I know you've talked about it in loads of podcasts, so I don't want to butcher the point, but I just think it's important for our listeners to get some context. But you talked about that time in 21 when the business went tits up. And I think there was 2 quotes you said. You said, I was ready to fucking kill myself is what you said on one podcast talking about that period. Yeah. And in another podcast you said, I was like a phoenix from the ashes and like rose from the ashes. And I think lots of that will give a lot of people listening to this podcast power to realize that when you're fucked on the floor, you can get back up and you can keep going. And they're never going to have to go through what you went through. But just to give some context, like what happened with the sign business and how did it go Pete Tong? And then we'll get on to how you rose from the ashes.
Yeah, I mean, very long story short, went from doing like £1 million a month in sales from my kitchen, entirely bootstrapped, profitable, going great. Well, probably like a lot of businesses in 2020, because it was in 2020 when it grew. And I was also running my jewellery business at the same time. So I had 2 businesses collectively doing about 1.2 million a month in revenue when I was 24. So like I hadn't raised a single penny of investment. So going pretty well. Yeah, the long story short, the neon one went tits up because a supplier ran off with loads of money. They got paid up front, essentially had gone bankrupt in the background because of COVID. And I hadn't done my due diligence and had paid them too much money. And very complicated supply chains. We're making B2B signs, basically. It was all sold online, but, most of our customers were barbershops, like people that wanted custom stuff. So everything was made to order, massive AOV, very complicated product, huge shipping costs. So very quickly went from having like over £1 million in the bank to being insolvent and not being able to pay fucking creditors. And loads of orders disappeared. We're talking 3 million quid's worth of orders that didn't get delivered during peak season Q4 while I had a primetime TV ad campaign slot with ITV because we did a Love Island campaign, a Love Island collaboration campaign. So you kind of have to laugh at it now because it was absurdly big given I was the only shareholder and had a team of people in the Philippines. I just thought it was normal because that's all I'd ever really known. It was like scaling online businesses. But that one just went too big too quick and was built on pretty rocky foundations in hindsight. I didn't have any experience or expertise around me because, I don't know, I've dropped out of uni and just started building shit on my laptop. Very quickly, I would call it a real life MBA and learning how to deal with a business when it goes tits up and bringing in the fucking administrators and doing the process properly and customers getting their money back, ultimately at the expense of my equity and mental health. And then I worked for 6 months with the business that bought that business on a salary for the first time in my life. A nice salary, granted, but a big like a big pay cut from what I was used to, I guess. And then at the end of that period, decided, fuck this, I want to do my own thing again. Sold my equity in that for a bit of money, and then that was September 2021. And for the first time, I had a blank slate. First time since I dropped out of uni, I was like, I don't actually have anything to work on right now. So I started a podcast and started building this brand around that time, basically. But it was incredibly rough. And I'd be lying if I said I was actually over it even now. Like, I still have fucking therapy going over that, because there's still a lot that I haven't probably come to peace with, to be honest. Because it was financial fuckery, which I think is definitely worse when you don't come from money and you've worked your ass off for 5 years prior to get to the position to even be able to do that in the first place. I didn't have any money given to me ever. Do not come from silver spoon background, which, to be completely honest, a lot of founders do. I find particularly in the consumer product space in London, naming no names. But yeah, and then it was also just social media abuse. Like, I was getting death threats for like 3 months. I had to change my phone number. I actually had to move where I lived. It got that bad. Like, I had the Daily Mail at my door threatening to expose me as a fraud, even though the absolute opposite was the truth. I had lost like over £1 million and didn't know how to pay back creditors that I had taken on debts from to try and solve the problems. So yeah, it's pretty rough. And yeah, I definitely still have PTSD now, like, about the shit people said to me and made me feel like, and ever since then, I've probably been incredibly paranoid about, you know, the internet and what can go wrong. But it's also given me a very thick skin. And I don't really think anything stresses me that much anymore, because it's like, fuck it. I got through 2021 when I was 2.5 stone heavier, broke up with my ex-girlfriend, probably because of the fucking shell of my former self that made me become. And yeah, I don't know. I just think, even now, I think there's a lot of talk about entrepreneurship. It's about failure, you know, fall down, get up again. But like, how many people saying that have ever actually experienced a failure? And I'm not talking about you can't get the business off the ground because you're shit at selling stuff. I mean, building a massive business and then having it go wrong. I think that's an actual failure. Not like, oh, I can't sell my fucking crisp brand to Tesco. I've put 3 grand into it. Boo-hoo. Like, that's just, you don't know what you're doing. But failure when there's 500,000 Instagram followers, you've got 2 million quid in secured creditors, literally sending you letters, and you've got fucking a dedicated Facebook group with pictures of you as a child in, because you've got some nutters on the internet that somehow think that's okay because they didn't get their product in time for Christmas. So yeah, it was a brutal combination of just like online abuse and financial fuckery. And, you know, I'm long past that business now, and I've started another one. Everyone tells me how successful it is, but yeah, there's a lot of pain that I've gone through just in entrepreneurship in general, which every founder does, but also, you know, that business going wildly wrong and then having to start again from scratch. And yeah, it wasn't easy to dust myself off from that and go again. And I think my self-confidence has been eternally damaged from that, if I'm honest. But obviously I've managed to get up and do it again. And I think I've got a much better business now, but it's much fucking harder to start D2C Brand now than it was even 2-3 years ago. And I can say that because I was doing it 2-3 years ago and I was objectively worse at what I'm doing, but it was way easier and I grew way quicker. Like, you know, a lot of investors I speak to and so on tell me how amazing I'm doing now, but I don't believe them, because I was doing, you know, 2-3 times the numbers back when I was 24, which is also something I'll probably never get over until I scale this business to 10 times what I've done in the past. So I've definitely got a massive chip on my shoulder to outdo my previous self, but it's just doing it in a much harder market, which maybe we can get onto. But yeah,
that's 100%. We're gonna explore that, mate. Is how building, you know, D2C Brand now versus 2019 was the heyday period,
yeah,
as you've said. But what you've said there is super powerful, and I think you're right. Like, failure, not getting his crisp brand into Tesco is not a failure. Like, that's just a knock, is all it is. But I think out of everyone I was interviewed, this is a serious failure that has had, like, people are trying to assassinate your character, I think, is what I've garnered.
Yeah.
What you said, I was ready to fucking kill myself. Like, what was the worst specific moment during that hell period, and what was the steps you took to be the phoenix from the ashes? Do you know what I mean? Because I think that will help a lot of people who aren't going to go through anything anywhere near as hard as what you've gone through.
Yeah, I think there's like two two periods I can remember where I think it was like rock bottom, and they're very different. One of them was when I just knew it was kind of irreparable, and I would ultimately lose the business, and that was probably in like February 2021. And that was also around the time where I was literally had to change my phone number because people were calling me a scammer and all this shit. So it's pretty difficult to deal with, but you just have to fucking get up and deal with it. And then I think the second most difficult period was when I found myself in like October 2021. I actually think I have a video on my phone of me just filming it and being like, this is the worst period of my life, but I'll probably get past it. Whether I'll ever post that video anyway, I don't know. But I'd just broken up with my ex-girlfriend, which, by the way, was never going to work anyway. Like, I don't regret that, but at the time it was fucking miserable because we were living together and so on. So, you know, my business has disappeared. I'm back to square one. I'm like 2.5 stone heavier than I was now or previous because I just became a fat fuck in hindsight because I was just pleasure eating, stress eating. So, yeah, but probably that. Day jump out was like 2 times where I just thought, fuck this is really difficult, and especially when you have nothing to work on. But then that's when I ultimately started working on the next thing. And then I got into like running, and that really helped me. I ended up running a really quick marathon, and that became like this good story that I put on my YouTube and so on. Probably need another challenge like that because that definitely helped me get out of a rut. I actually feel like I'm in a bit of a secondary rut right now, to be honest. Maybe we can speak about that. But yeah, I started working on the brand, and I just literally wrote down like what I want to do next. I'm obviously going to start something because that's all I've ever known. Like, I would literally rather jump off a bridge than work for someone else, as dramatic as that sounds, but it's like literally how my mind works because it's all I've ever known. I think any true founder would say that and mean it, not just for dramatic effect. But yeah, then I guess I just fucking did it again, came up with an idea and worked on it and made it reality, which is a lot more work than it sounds saying that. But the fundamentals are, I decided what I was going to do and just started working on it, and it became a real product quite quickly. And then I started growing the business because I guess I knew how to grow a D2C business particularly because I'd done it 3 times before at that point.
What, just to give some context, I know you're open, you don't have to give the exact numbers, but what kind of revenue are you guys doing now with Spacegoods?
Yeah, I'll just tell you. We've done about 3.5 million since we launched 16 months ago. Did about 4 million this calendar year, which is the first full calendar year. Yeah, I mean...
And what split of that is D2C? Because I know you've launched into Holland & Barrett, and
it's really funny this. I'm going to get cancelled from the shit I'm going to say on this podcast. Like, it's funny how everyone like basically licks your ass the second you're in retail, but it's literally, that was like a 30 grand order. It's like less than 1% of revenue. But everyone's perception is, oh, you're the biggest brand in the world because you're in Holland & Barrett, which I just find funny because no one gives a shit if you do 10 million D2C because they can't see your numbers. Like, when I was growing both my brands previously, no one would have known about me as a founder at all, even though I was probably doing twice the revenue of half the VC-backed startups in London. I didn't have any staff. But because I wasn't on billboards or in Holland & Barrett or whatever it is, no one would care, and they just think, oh, this guy's just some fucking dropshipper. Do you know what I mean? So it's just funny how, like,
so I've talked about that.
Different.
Yeah, I've talked a lot about that on this because my background is in the retail space. Is what I worked for a startup for 5-6 years, helped grow that, and it was going through that retail listing. Like, as soon as you're in Selfridges, it's like, fucking hell, clap the batsman. But it's like, that may be 500 quid a month.
Yeah,
but people like,
I find it so
people
funny.
like masturbating over you on socials. It's like, oh my god, in Selfridges. Don't get me wrong, it's a sick store to be in, but I think people get blinded in thinking that retail is the way, or is the panacea to just build a brand. There's other ways. Okay, so that's great. So 3 million, 4 million this year. That's fucking sick. That's unreal. It takes a lot of time. So congrats. And
I honestly feel like it's a fucking tiny business. I've done nothing with my life. Like, I speak to my therapist about this shit. It's just like, because my standards are so high, and I think because I experienced such scale at a young age, it's like, until I'm doing 20 million, I'll feel like an absolute miserable failure. That's just the truth, which is probably a very toxic, painful trait to have, but also probably a good one, because I'd rather it be that way around than have raised 5 million, be doing 5 million in revenue, like a lot of brands that I could probably name but won't, and think I'm the shit. Whereas I guess because I come from an entirely bootstrap background, like, I did raise a bit of money for this brand, which I can tell you about, but wasn't like VC money or anything. So I'm comparing myself now to, I guess, easier times in sort of 2019, 2020 when I was at peak scale with my previous businesses, but also to a bootstrap business that had never raised a penny. Whereas now I've raised a bit of money, and yeah, I guess we are doing pretty well. I mean, there's a lot of VCs I'm speaking to and so on, which I'm really unsure what to do about as well. But yeah, I probably don't give myself enough credit because everyone I speak to, other founders, particularly in this sort of space, like supplements, says that, oh, wow, 4 million in like your first full calendar year working from a bedroom. That's actually fucking amazing. But I just don't think it is because, I don't know, because I've done bigger numbers before. So like, I'm not saying that to like blow smoke at my ass because, I'm aware that it's like a decent sized business, but yeah, I just feel like I've achieved nothing with my life, to be honest. And
that's mad. Yeah. Like, and you're not the first
probably
one.
Exposing myself too much, and I get some investor that
because I
thinks I'm a nutter and will pull the plug on the term sheet. But it is what it is.
Well, I had that. I have that with. I go see a therapist as well. Like I used to be, well, like just partying was my sort of escape from that negative self-talk. And sort of working through it. I'm actually trying to take, as of last week, taking 6 weeks off the booze just to give a bit of a reset because it was just ridiculous. Helps. But it does in that moment of time soften that voice in your head. And one of the things that I've sort of tried to do recently is I used to beat myself up so much. So if I haven't achieved this, like I've just hit 30, right? As of like 2 weeks ago, I was like, I've got to achieve all these things by this age. And I think actually sometimes goals for type A people who are so goals obsessed can actually be quite dangerous.
Yeah, honestly, to be honest, I thought I'd have 30 million quid by now if you asked me when I was 20. Yeah, but I don't. So, and I'm 27, and I get my problem as well. Sorry, you can bring this back to actual shit you want to speak about because I'm very good at just rambling. My problem, and it's a blessing and a horrible problem, is I have so many disgustingly successful friends that are self-made. You know, like one of my best mates, won't mind me saying this, he's like 24 and he's got a jewellery business called Sanucci doing like 30 million in revenue, and he's 24 and he founded it from scratch. Like, and I've got my old flatmate running a shoe brand doing like 10 million plus in revenue. My previous flatmate's got a pet brand doing similar numbers. Like some of my investors are guys in their early 30s that have built and sold brands for like multi 8 figures. So I'm like, fuck, I feel like I'm doing absolutely nothing with my life. But I guess if you compare, I just don't, that's the problem I have, is I compare myself to the 0.01%, which is good and bad. But it's like going for your first fucking 5K run and comparing yourself to Eliud Kipchoge. You're always going to feel disappointed. But if you compare yourself to the average bloke that does the 5K park run and you're running like a 17-minute 5K, then you're probably doing all right. It just depends which way you look at it.
It's how you look at it. And I think with me, with therapy, it's all been about just perspective shifting. That's basically why I'm paying the bloke fucking like, do you know what I mean? But I think what you're saying there is it's like two things. They always say, like, don't be the most clever person in the room. So if all your mates are like doing super well, like that's sick because you're learning off them. But then also the boats rise with the tide. So I think it's just you're in a pond that is doing so well, that 0.001%. that you're like beating yourself up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In terms of, so you said you're at another rut now.
Yeah.
Go on, talk to me about that. Why?
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely something I'm aware of now since my prefrontal cortex or whatever it is fully formed age 25, now 27. So I feel like I have a bit more perspective on the world. I get so excited and I'm so good at 0 to 1. I don't mean 0 to a million in revenue. I mean just like 0 to 1 idea to business, which I guess in my case has been 0 to that first few million in revenue. I find like really quite easy, and because I've done it so many times, I find I get really excited about creating new stuff and kind of that honeymoon period of a new business. And then I get to where I'm at now, with 16 months in or whatever it is, which is still super early, but for me feels like a long time. And I'm like, fuck, this is actually quite hard. It's like that initial turbo boost from newness has subsided, and now I'm like, well, if I want this to get where I'm going, and I need to probably spend at least another 5 years on it, which I am going to do, because I'm not, I'm not saying I'm going to chop and change and start another fucking brand again, but even though that's what I did in the past. So I guess partly that, but then also partly thinking about a bit of a crossroads where I can have this kind of semi-bootstrapped, I would call it bedroom-sized business, where you're doing a few million in revenue, but you're never going to get looked at from like a big acquirer because you're just too small. But you're also big enough to like have a nice lifestyle, live in a nice central London flat, have a decent car, whatever. But I've done all that before, and it's not very exciting because I've done it all before. So now it's like, do I need to probably just put my balls on the line, raise millions of VC capital, like basically all the brands that have really scaled, and like try and pump it to like 10x where we are now, which to be honest is probably what I want to do.
Sorry to interrupt. What would you do with the VC money though? What would that enable you to do? Like, where would you be spending that money?
Well, it's a lot of things. I think retail is a massive part of it, and product development. For example, I've got an RTD ready to do a canned version in development, but minimums are massive. It's always a risk doing a retail specific product when we don't have any retail listings apart from H&B. So there's that side of things. I think new markets is an obvious one. Launching in Germany, Netherlands, Europe, then eventually America, which is the obvious big one. But I guess beyond that, it's just pumping more fucking money on marketing. Because if you're semi-bootstrapped, you have to watch every fucking pound a bit more. Whereas brands that go and raise millions and millions just say, all right, Instagram, here's 20 grand a day. Spend. So, because, like, if I had 10 million quid in the bank, I'm absolutely certain I could get to like 50 million in revenue. I'd just be spending a fuckload of money on ads and losing money, which is what a lot of brands do. Whereas when you're way less funded, like I am compared to a lot of our competitors, you can't spend 20 grand a day on Instagram because you need to probably get a 2.5x return on that, which doesn't really happen when you spend 20 grand a day, at least not quickly. So yeah. I guess it's just growing quicker. It's not necessarily the only way to grow to like 30 million in revenue, but I think you'd be hard pressed to find a CPG brand that's grown to like multi-8-figure revenue, which seems to be the level you have to be at to have a strategic come and buy you for a revenue multiple, which is probably the biggest opportunity to finally get rich. But yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to find one that's done that like bootstrapped. Certainly a lot of the brands I look up to, like, Trip, Wild Cosmetics, Huel, Grenade, etc. None of them have bootstrapped it.
Yeah.
Arguably, Grenade did probably the longest of them all. But yeah, it's also a different time. A lot of those brands launched pre-pandemic, pre-iOS 14, pre-CACs going up through the roof.
So Jules, the founder of Grenade's been on this podcast, and or the co-founder, and she was saying that the timing is everything. And obviously there was that brand called Quest's Nutrition in the States.
Yeah, I remember them. Tom Bilyeu.
Tom Bilyeu, and they'd followed that and they launched it in the UK. And then she was like, the timing was fucking unreal. And we got kind of lucky. And I genuinely think with this mushroom space, this move away from coffee, like the timing is right. Because it is bigger in the States. I think you're on to a winner there. But she said to me, and quite a few people have said this, she goes, the day I sold the business, I made 250 mils, fucking worst day of my life. The day the money dropped in the account. She said that.
I really want that worst day of my life. Trust me. I'll feel a nice bad day.
But do you think, and then just to build on that, the founder of Tyrrell's Crisps, Royal Chase, he's been on this podcast, and he said that his way of saying it was when you're in the winners and close, you realise all the fun was in the race, aka the destination is the journey.
Yeah.
So are you so fixated on the destination that do you think that could potentially cripple you from enjoying the journey, or how do you enjoy the journey of building Spacegoods?
Yeah, there's a few points there. I think the first point is I see like the end goal with this business is very much twofold. And I say this very pragmatically and openly to like any potential investor I speak to and whatever. So the first thing is I genuinely would like to think I could work on / in this space of trying to bring psilocybin to the forefront and masses for like the next 30 years. And that would be great to have a positive impact on the world and blah, blah, blah. But you need a lot of money and capital to do that. And the pragmatic part of me, probably largely because I've seen the highs and lows of making loads of money in my early 20s and losing a load of it as well, is I'd like to sell the business and fucking make 20 million quid, because it just gives you more freedom and allows you to start more businesses and have a bigger impact. Like, you know, you can't really help anyone unless you've got capital to help their idea or their mission or whatever it is. Like, I've never wanted to be the starving artist. And I think a lot of people pursue like the creative aspect of something so much, but they forget that it has to be commercially viable as well. And I think I've maybe got quite a good balance between the two. Like, I'm a creative at heart, but I also know that if I don't sell any fucking products, the creativity doesn't matter, because it's going to be sat on a shelf and never reach anyone. So, and again, maybe that sounds kind of cynical, but it's also just the fucking reality. Like, I need customers that like the product to grow the business and have any sort of impact. Otherwise, it ain't going to work, and I'm going to have to pack it in and do something else. The flip side of that, and partly why I maybe feel like I haven't enjoyed it and haven't enjoyed the journey, which is kind of relevant to your second part of the question before I go too off-piste, is when I launched the brand, like, I made this fucking 80s movie. I was so inspired about, like, I loved the design of the product and I was so excited. But then when you launch and start growing and have responsibilities and obligations and a small team to take care of, and recently a slightly bigger team, but I made some changes there that were quite difficult, but having to deal with all that shit. And then it kind of becomes like a fucking job. And it's like, oh, fuck, I'm actually not doing any of the exciting creative stuff that I was doing at the start. But I'm doing the stuff that needs to be done, which is focusing on supply chain, cash flow, you know, looking at raising money. You know, I spend more time looking at fucking financial forecasts now than I do at new packaging designs. That's just the reality. Even though I still lead all the product development, and everything you see visually is largely me and this other genius guy that works for me called Brad. So I find that balance really difficult, because a lot of what I know I need to do just objectively isn't fun, isn't enjoyable. You know, it's fucking boring supply chain stuff. It's obsessing over CAC. It's making sure our conversion rate's higher. It's making sure we don't churn too much during summer, which, by the way, we did. And I was stressing through the floor about it. And, you know, spending hours and hours crunching numbers, because at the end of the day, particularly a D2C first business, it's like day trading almost. It's what is CAC today? What revenue have we done? How much have we spent? Do we have enough stock? Is our cash flow good, so we don't fucking over order for stock for Q4 or under order for Q1, you know? So I think, yeah, so it's not all enjoyable, basically, because you have to work on stuff that's necessary and not necessarily like fun. So I find the balance there quite difficult, because I would love to make 80s movies and drive a fucking DeLorean through Mayfair all the time, making, like, you know, movies like I've done for the product. But A, they don't sell product. You know, fast performing UGC designed for TikTok generation does. And B, it's probably just a waste of money spending 10 grand on a movie that 4,000 people watch organically on YouTube, because you don't run any ads to it, because it doesn't convert. So that's just like the sad truth of some of the stuff I've done, is that the most fun stuff was just categorically the least financially effective and probably the most financially retarded. Whereas the stuff that moves the needle right now is performance creative, landing pages, and having enough stock of the products that sell, which is basically Rainbow Dust, because our Dream Dust product kind of flopped and I'm redoing it. So it's a very simple business, but with that, it means that it's not all creativity and, you know,
it's almost
fun stuff. So
it's almost like the thing we said right at the beginning. It's the creative pursuit of a greater self. It's almost like this machine that you've built is actually not allowing you to be creative, because you're getting pulled into the weeds of fucking Excel and forecasts and cash flow versus doing the creative stuff. And as you've said many a time, that you're at heart a creative. And I think that's, for people listening to this, which are founders of FMCG, CPG brands, there's a lot in that. There's the honeymoon period where, as you say, you've got all the lust and the joy of the brand. But as it gets bigger, it's got to become more grown up. I want to talk about this recent month, if you're okay to talk about that. I mean, you discussed it on documenting the journey, and I want to talk about that. But for people, why I love that so much is basically, I think every founder is having those voices in your head, but you just put it into documenting the journey, which is like 15-minute videos. And I think it's
I often think, like, fuck, am I putting too much out on the internet? But I mean, for anyone that's watched the podcast, I think arguably from what I've seen, I'm probably one of the most honest, at least authentically myself, people on YouTube, even though my audience is fucking tiny compared to anyone that actually, you know, a proper YouTuber or podcaster. But I think there's so much just filtering reality these days. The whole idea of that series in particular is that it's literally unfiltered. I mean, I swear all the fucking time, so I'm demonetized. But that's just how I speak. I probably say too much. Yeah, sometimes I think, do I delete all of that and just fucking focus on my own shit? But the whole idea of it was just, it's probably quite interesting to look back on in 10 years. And if I'm going to do it by default, if I do it anything other than entirely honestly, then it's just not worth doing. So... yeah, it's surprising that people watch that, given it's me talking shit for 15 minutes on like a random Wednesday evening in my flat. So, yeah.
I think it's unreal, and I think it's an honest lens into the workings of a founder's mind. Like every founder on LinkedIn will be like, "Oh my god, everything's going banging!" Like,
yeah, I hate LinkedIn for that. It's just full of shit, honestly.
Yeah, full of shit. Whereas like what's the reality is, they may post that on LinkedIn, but in their head they're thinking, "Oh my god, this is going wrong. How am I going to manage that? Have I raised enough money?" And your documenting the journey does that. But the most recent one said it's been a fucking rough month. And I know you said something. Well, two things. The honeymoon period we've already talked about. Then you said trying to act and be a startup, adding too much fluff, and the team has grown quicker than revenue. If we zoom in on that, like, so what happened, and what do you mean by trying to act and be a startup, adding too much fluff?
Yeah, I probably offend loads of people with what I'm saying about this, and it's just my view. But I think the first thing is, I think there's so many brands that look bigger than they are, but if you saw their P&L, you'd be like, why the fuck do you have a Shoreditch office? Like, just do it remotely and actually be profitable. Because so many brands that if they don't raise their next round, they're just fucked. So I just never wanted to be in that position. And it comes back to like the Holland & Barrett point. I thought, you know, having an office and loads of PAY employees would look better for, I don't know, the fucking external world, and maybe make the business more attractive to potential investors or acquirers and so on. But B, I thought that's what will make me fulfilled. Like, that's a proper business. So yeah, that's the first thing. I think because of that, I think I just introduced a lot of fluff, like, to give some actual practical examples, because most people probably don't when they say things like that, is like, I spent loads of money on a PR firm, and then I realized, hold on, this literally does nothing to our revenue. It just sounded cool, because I thought, oh, I'm a startup, we should do PR. It's absolute bollocks. Just spend more on Instagram ads. I guarantee that is better for you as a business, unless you're at like critical mass and you cannot spend any more money on Instagram and you've got 10 million quid burning a hole in your pocket, which most startups probably don't. So don't do that. Yeah, and then kind of just having too many meetings, and I feel like a lot of people want to be seen working in a cool place, i.e. like Soho Works, have a fucking sticker on their laptop, but they're less bothered about actually doing the work, which in reality is just looking at a screen and executing the tasks that need to be done, rather than having a fucking certain branded chai latte, working in a cafe, which, by the way, I just do not think works. You get no work done when you're just in a cafe. You just scroll Instagram and get a coffee. I don't know. Am I being super cynical and horrible?
No, I've got a...
The reality is just, if you want to actually move the needle, it's about just getting your fucking hands dirty. And probably a lot of that is either in an office or remotely, like I am currently. Like, I'm not saying offices are bad. I'm just saying for like a lot of early stage startups, I would question the value of having a fancy office with lots of people in it. But then also it comes down to preference, because I think I kind of lost sight of why I got into entrepreneurship in the first place, which always for me was like location and time freedom. Like, I spent years living out in like Bali and Australia and so on, which I fucking loved. And as I got a bit older, I thought, oh, I need to be in one place with an office.
Where did that come from? That need, that's almost, as you say, to act like a startup and that security. Like, where did that come from?
I think maybe it came from looking at other startups and thought, oh, they've got an office in London. They don't have any like freelance remote team members. I should do that. But then I started pivoting more towards that. I'm not saying I won't ever do that. I just think I probably did it too soon and for the wrong reasons. And I probably lacked self-awareness doing that, and thought, yeah, I need to be in one place. We need to force everyone into a fucking boxy office 9 hours a day, and that's how we're going to grow. Whereas when you strip it back, it's like we just need to spend more on Instagram ads and have a nice landing page, which doesn't necessarily require any more team members or an office. So yeah, I'm not sure I've got that right by, like, we got rid of some people and just decided that need to simplify things, and that was quite difficult.
Yeah, how did you, because people listening to this will have to make tough decisions with letting go of people and doing the right thing for the business. I know you had like an MD come in, like,
Yeah.
What was the rationale? And if you don't want to go here, we don't have to, but I'd appreciate it. But what was so you bring in the MD, you hire these PAYE employees. What does the team at Spacegoods look like? And then how has it now changed? Like, how are you still going to grow where there's less people? Because ultimately less people means less resource. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, so I think because of my previous business, where I'd only ever worked with freelancers and outsourced agencies and never had anyone experienced in the business, I probably thought, now to do it right, I have to have loads of experienced people in the business, loads of expensive experienced people, because that will somehow mean guaranteed success. Whereas actually the reality is probably somewhere in between. Whereas I lean on experienced people, like some of my investors now. I don't necessarily need loads of employees. So yeah, like the team now is basically back to where it was like 6 months ago, which is slightly different to what it was for 6 months in between. I have myself and 4 other full-time freelancers, and by the way, freelance, I actually think there's basically no negative to having a freelancer over an employee, because for example, the core team right now is myself. We've got an operations guy, got a finance guy, got Brad, who's the creative genius that makes all these movies and shit, and then I have a girl called Lucy who runs all content stuff. But then we also work with 4 different agencies. So people hear like 5 people and think, 5 people including me, and think that's tiny. But then it's like, we've got a media buying agency who are investors in the brand, so they do all that. We have a web design agency who do a lot of landing page stuff alongside myself. We work with, our main supplier is effectively an outsourced product development agency as well. So they do all our sampling and, nutritional stuff and batch testing, all that shit. Our fulfillment's outsourced to a 3PL. So it's like, there's no one in a warehouse on my team. So that brings down the headcount a lot. We also have an Amazon agency who run our Amazon. We also have a content agency. I would actually argue we have too many people even now. So yeah, having a few more PAYE employees on top of that, just in hindsight, I don't think made sense, because I think the beauty of D2C particularly, and we have a retail agency, by the way, which I forgot to mention. So there's a fucking lot of agencies. It's not like it's just me and 4 other people. It's like they're the core team that are full time, but we also lean on a lot of resource externally. And I think agencies for a lot of things, media buying probably being the best example, having done both myself. I've spent millions on ads myself in the past. I've hired people to do it in-house, and I've used agencies. And I think with something like that, you're actually way better off having an agency than a PAY employee, because they have visibility over 30 other clients. So on something like media buying, when it's so algorithm heavy, it benefits you by using an agency or a freelancer rather than a PAY employee who's pigeonholed into your business, especially when something like that ultimately doesn't actually take like 9 hours a day. It's probably an hour a day maintenance and testing. So it doesn't make sense to have someone sat there twiddling their thumbs. But yeah, where was I going? That's an overview of the team currently. I mean, yeah, I brought in an MD, and I just, in hindsight, it was premature. So that's why we parted ways fundamentally. And I think, yeah, it's just a pretty black or white decision with certain things. I think certain jobs as well, they are harder to quantify with numbers. Like another person we brought in was a community manager, which in hindsight was just, again, premature, because it's not really stuff we're focused on for business right now. What we're focused on is basically spending more on Instagram ads, because that is actually what moves the needle. Doing random pop-ups here and there, to be honest, is probably just a cost right now. It's probably not anything else. I think there's a time and a place for that. And I think even for our brand, that could be pretty soon. It's just comes down to focus. I think that the problem now, I think, is there are a billion ways to grow a business, but also a million different distractions, and so many people want your money for their services, and different ad platforms want you to invest in them over another one. But like, yeah, pretty much everything is a waste of time in a startup, I think. And you have to find the things that aren't a waste of time. And for most D2C brands, in my view, broadly, they are probably creating a great product, creating a decent website or landing page, and sending more people to that website or landing page and converting more of them. Because that is what drives revenue. And that's kind of the most important thing when you're trying to grow a business. It's not how many people do we have on payroll, because that won't last very long if the business isn't grown.
You've got an ability, I think, with every guest I speak to this, I always see this kind of this one ability or superpower come through. And I think yours is the ability just to be super militantly focused and simple. I know it's gone a bit off piste recently with those fires, but to be so cutthroat with it. And I think you're right. Like I think having a big team is a fucking swinging dick contest for when you're at Soho House. Do you know what I mean? It's just to be like, oh, I've got my team's doing so well. We're going to go and do this like away day. We're going to do all this shit.
Yeah, I think there's a weird, it feels like there's a weird obsession with founders gloating about how much money they've raised and how big their team is, but never like what their top and bottom line are. People seem to shy away from like how many customers do you actually have? Not like how much have you raised from VCs that are going to fucking screw you if you don't hit numbers. I don't know, like it's a strange culture. And I think because I come from like just a bootstrap background where it was just me and a bunch of lads in a sweaty fucking co-work space in Bali, like running Facebook ads on a credit card, like literally starting with 100 quid. I suppose I've just never subscribed to the idea that you should raise loads of money, lose loads of money, and hire loads of people just for the sake of it. And I'm not saying all businesses do that, because a lot of businesses you do need to raise loads of money and hire lots of people. But I would argue that a lot of the businesses that do that probably would be surprised to know how many businesses have tiny teams that are probably actually bigger than them. Like one of my investors and mates, and I won't say his business, but he's literally bootstrapped. He's 27 years old and he's got a business doing 50 million a year. He lives in Northern Ireland. He would not put anything on social media. You wouldn't know who the fuck he is. You probably look at his website and think like it's some tiny little website, but he's probably bigger than all the VC-backed D2C brands in London combined. But you just would never know about him because he's not on LinkedIn, isn't in Soho House.
Yeah. It's
not that there's anything wrong with that, because I like Soho House as well, and I've put myself on the internet and obviously to an extent want to look good, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. I feel like I come from like this deep, dark underground of just like bootstrap bedroom founders. And it's just a different way of looking at things to a lot of like the LinkedIn sort of PR brigade these days, which is all about how many team members you've got, how many mental health days you're doing, which by the way is valuable because mental health has been probably the biggest challenge in my life. But I'm also just very realistic about like team members don't pay the bills unless they're fucking bringing in revenue and growing the business. And I just think startups are actually so hard. I think people have lost sight to like how statistically rare it is to actually succeed to like any level with like a startup brand. So yeah, like it's obviously going to be brutally difficult because you're trying to do something that most people can't do or won't do.
Completely agree, mate. And what I want to ask you is, there'll be people listening to this who have got an employee on their books who is costing them too much dough, quite simply, but they don't have the bollocks, or not they don't have the bollocks, they're just finding it hard to navigate that conversation. How did you let go of those people? Like, what's the Matt Kelly way of being like, how do you let those people go? And is there any advice you give people who are potentially sat on the fence of, it's so good we've got a team for LinkedIn purposes, but actually they should probably let some people go in order to actually move the fucking needle? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, I'm probably terrible at it because I'm really inexperienced hiring and firing people. So I'm sure both of them would say I'm terrible at it. But I think it just has to, I think if you're transparent about the performance of the business, I actually think a lot of employees don't actually realize like where the money goes. And I'm not saying just team members in general, but I've actually had comments in the past from people that clearly have never run a startup and never will, that seem to think that revenue is money in the founder's pocket. Like, it's actually wild. Like, A, revenue is not profit. And secondly, even if it was profit, it wouldn't be in my pocket. It'd be going straight back into stock. I think a lot of non-founders have maybe lost sight of like the fact that founders are working 18 hours a day and probably paying themselves last for like many, many, many years, even if it goes well. So I think just being transparent about the realities of that, and yeah, it comes down to performance really. I think any team, particularly small ones, should be like upfront about numbers. I think that's very helpful. Like I think your entire team should know like what revenue you're doing, like if that's on target or not. So and where they play into that, because yeah, it's like a well-oiled machine really. And I think just being honest is probably a good place to start. And also being honest when you're not hitting targets, when your CAC's too high, when you're not growing revenue enough, like ours was last month, or for the past 2 months, to be honest. But if you pretend everything's perfect all the time, I think that's probably a slippery slope, particularly in the startup, just in general.
Where I want to go now, mate, is you said you dropped out of university, rewinded back, and I almost think you had this old MBA that you created yourself. You left Northumbria, went and, as you said, bootstrapping from Bali, maxing out on MX to build a D2C brand. A lot of our listeners are CPG businesses, and what they do is they'll focus solely on retail and completely neglect D2C, whereas you're coming out from the other way around. And actually, I suppose the value of D2C is you've got way more margin, got more control of the whole customer journey. But I'd love to go into like, what are the principles of getting a D2C brand going? Say there's someone listening to this who's got a product in Sainsbury's, for example, but they're like, right, D2C could be a big play for us. No fucking idea what to do. I know a lot of this will be really like obvious to you, but for our listeners, it won't be. What are the top 3 things you absolutely must do? And then what are the top 3 things biggest mistakes that most people make when they're starting out? Like almost like put into noob language, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, like I'm a noob with retail, so I'm kind of coming at it from the opposite way. I guess the beauty of D2C is speed. I think, you know, you can literally go from nothing to your first 100 grand in revenue in weeks if it goes well. Whereas retail, that's obviously not the case, and I'm learning that. But fundamentally, D2C comes down to the golden ratio is LTV to CAC, really.
Just those so lifetime value in customer acquisition.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, if you can increase the distance between those numbers, your LTV be higher, your CAC be lower, then basically you've got a good business. And
sorry to
consumables.
What are those? Just to sorry to put this in like D2C for dummies language, but what are those for listeners? Lifetime value and CAC.
Yeah. So with LTV or LTR, so lifetime value or lifetime revenue, kind of the same thing, depends on where you slice it. It's just how much a customer will spend in their lifetime with your brand. So from their first purchase to their last purchase, or, you know, you typically would look at like a 12-month LTV, so how much they spend over a year. So in my case, that's how much rainbow dust has someone bought over a year. You know, whether they're a one-time purchaser or a subscriber. You know, we're a subscription-heavy business, so that's pretty good for LTV. And CAC is just cost to acquire a customer. So if you spend £1,000 in Instagram ads, say, and you acquire 100 customers, your CAC is 10 quid because you acquired 100 and you spent 1,000, right? Easy maths.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically, they're your metrics. And ultimately, D2C, you'll be running paid social, Google, TikTok ads. They're the 3 we do right now. So Meta, TikTok, Google. Right now, I'm spending about 160 grand a month on paid social, which is quite a lot. And yeah, basically, and then to do that, we're running a lot of creative. So, you know, 30-second ads, you've probably seen them before, like fucking pink packet, showing it all, blah, blah, blah. Like creative. Yeah, creative is the most important thing. So we have a system for that, which I've built up over the past year and a bit. We test a fuckload of new creatives. We run ads. We primarily run ads in the UK, but you can do it worldwide. You run it to your website or a landing page. Most of our stuff's dedicated landing page. You know, someone lands on the page, read about the product, buy it, whatever. So yeah, fundamentally, like our target CAC, so new customer CAC is about 50 quid right now. So we're willing to spend about 50 quid to acquire a customer. Most of our customers now that we acquire do subscribe to the product. We know that most of them stay on average between 4 and 5 months in terms of buying it every month. So we know that our LTV is generally between 160 and 200 quid on a subscriber. So that's pretty healthy. You know, it's like a 3-to-1 ratio on the lower end, like LTV to CAC. Basically, a business that can spend more to acquire a customer is going to win in D2C long term. And the way you can do that is you can either increase your LTV or you can raise loads of fucking venture capital, because you know that eventually you're going to increase your LTV. So right now, if I could spend 100 quid instead of 50 quid, I could probably spend 4 times as much on Instagram, because the general economics of paid social or just paid ads in general is that the more you spend, the more expensive it gets. That's just how it works, because you're competing with more brands that have got bigger budget. So we're spending about 5 grand a day on ads right now. If we want to spend 50 grand a day, I'm probably going to have to work out how we can spend 100 quid instead of, or even 150 quid instead of 50 quid to acquire a customer. And really that means we're probably going to have to look at a 24-month LTV to justify that, because, you know, 150 to 200 doesn't really check out because there's no margin there by the time you're taking away COGS, fulfillment, tax, etc. So I don't know if that makes any sense for a beginner, but yeah, basically it's just driving more traffic to your website to acquire more customers, with the main metric being how much you spend to acquire a customer. But obviously there's loads of factors that go into that, like conversion rate. Is it a subscription product? Is it a one-time product? Do you have other products to upsell them on later? Because we've basically been a one-product business up to now, pretty much. We have our Dream Dust one, but kind of fucked that up, so I don't really market that. We're launching a new flavour next week for the first time, which should be quite cool for LTV, because we can obviously upsell existing customers. Got a few other things in the pipeline. But yeah, essentially, whoever can spend the most to acquire a single customer wins, because you can outbid everyone else and you can spend more on ads. And if you can spend more on ads, you can basically generate more revenue, and that's how you grow a business. So, you know, massive brands like Gymshark are probably spending hundreds of thousands per day on paid social, I would imagine. I don't know, I haven't seen their numbers, but just to give an idea of like how much brands actually spend on this shit. I mean, when I was running Neon Beach, I was spending 25 grand a day at one point on Instagram. So you're talking like 2 million people every day seeing your ads, which is quite a lot of people. So that's like, in a nutshell, how I've grown every business I've ever created. It's spending money on ads.
And when you say spending money on ads, and you said you've got this creative system. So say you put 20 grand into ads for Spacegoods.
Yeah.
Look, where's that money actually going? Is that on different are you testing lots of different adverts? Like, where does it? Because I think I kind of get the landscape, i.e. the CAC and the lifetime value and kind of how that works. But then I suppose so many brands who listen to this have a D2C business that does fuck all for them, does nowhere near 100 grand. Like, how are you spending that money? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I'm always amazed. I speak to a lot of founders that haven't really cracked D2C, and I say, are you running ads? And they say no. And I say, well, how the fuck does anyone ever going to know about your website then? Like, I don't understand it. Like, where does the revenue come from if people aren't going to the website? So yeah, I mean, so I said we spend like 5 grand a day right now on ads. I mean, about 80% of that is on Instagram. So those annoying ads you see that say sponsored. I mean, people listening to this might have seen the brand, or you've certainly seen other brands. You know, Athletic Greens are going really hard on Instagram right now. I feel like everyone is being hit by Athletic Greens and Huel and brands like that. I know Trip spending quite a lot on Instagram as well. I see their ads all the time. So yeah, when you see that ad and click, that's what I'm buying an impression basically. So with paid social, you pay per 1,000 people. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm paying to put my ads in front of you. So it's really important that my ad is good, and that when you click the ad, my website or landing page is good. So there's a lot of variables and moving parts, which is why I think D2C is like brutally complicated, because there are so many moving parts to fundamentally just sell a product, even when you have one product, which is a bit more simple. And then also like ads on Google. So if you search like mushroom coffee, you'll probably see Spacegoods come up on shopping. That's a different ad platform. So that's pay per click. That's YouTube. And then it's the same shit on TikTok. So, you know, you might see ads on TikTok. It's the same model as Instagram. So that's where the money's going. We're basically just buying impressions on ad platforms, and it's very targeted. You know, we're targeting people that might be interested in wellness, fitness, mushroom coffee, whatever it is. I mean, creative is probably the most important variable these days, because these ad platforms have such powerful algorithms, so much data, that you can almost just put zero targeting on an ad these days and just run a good creative, and Facebook it will find you buyers. It pretty much works like that.
What are the creatives that have worked like really well for you, and what are the flip side of that? What are the mistakes most people make with coming up with these ads you've seen?
Yeah, I think like a general theme from stuff I've done in the past as well is generally stuff that is really cheap to produce works better.
Really?
Yeah, honestly, like you'd be amazed how many times I've done fancy, like, I mean, even like those 80s movies I made that were kind of for fun, like they just simply do not convert customers. They're too long. No one's got an attention span like that. Stuff that works well for us is like just really choppy stuff that we've done loads of ads that are like kind of pretending it's like a magic potion with like graphics and shit. Stuff like that works pretty well. I mean, now we're actually trying to diversify a bit because almost all our ads have had like the same guy, that's Brad, that works for me in the ads. So now we're trying to pivot a bit more towards like an affluent middle-aged female audience. So we're using creators that are more in that demographic. But yeah, it's funny, like I've literally made an ad on my iPhone and made it myself in 10 minutes and it's performed better than a fucking studio shoot that costs $5,000. So yeah, I think like high production stuff should be on your website, and then stuff that's on ads should just be all about performance. Cause yeah, it's literally like, there's a science to it really. It's, you know, how many people you showing the ad to, how many are clicking through, how many convert on the website. It just comes down to numbers, which is probably what takes a lot of like the creative fun out of it, because you're not making a cinematic movie, you're making a conversion ad, and often you're testing like 25 of them every week. So it really is a numbers game. But yeah, it's pretty brutal. It's a numbers game.
And it's this huge user generated content, because now I always thought used to look at like trying to think of, can't remember some of the brands that have done it, but I've always thought, fucking hell, who's going to buy that? But it's mad that actually converts. At least I watched one of your adverts and I thought this was really interesting, and it goes back to your point of brands, founders being predominantly middle class, right? And it's like I went to a good school, like I came from a very privileged background. But I think what's really interesting is I don't know, I've discussed it with a few people in the podcast, but it's creating middle class people creating middle class products for middle class problems, and the messaging is very like, oh, hello mate, like how you doing? Do you know what I mean? Like all throughout. I watched your advert and I thought, this is sick. And I don't know what the reference is, but it was a whole myriad of different accents all around talking about the product. But you had like a Geordie, you had a Brummie, you had someone posh, you had a female, you had someone old. What's the why behind that? Because that really struck a chord with me.
Trying to think if I know the ad. I mean, that was probably actual customers speaking. And our customer base is very diverse, probably more diverse than I first thought, to be fair, because it's a pretty mass appeal product. But yeah, I mean, there probably was some logic to that. It might have just been a test. I don't actually know how well that ad did. It might perform way better if we all had a Southwest London accent. I don't know, but yeah, I think just ultimately it comes down to knowing your audience, right? And if you want to build a mass market brand, which I definitely do, I actually think right now we're not mass market enough. We're probably maybe a bit too pink and neon in terms of appealing to like a super mass market audience. Because ultimately anyone that drinks coffee is a potential customer in my mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas right now we're probably appealing mainly to early adopters that are like, oh, I want to try this pink thing. Whereas there's an argument to say like Karen in fucking Basingstoke, who's never heard of mushrooms before, might be a bit scared off by the fact that we're bright pink and, you know, we're alluding to psychedelics and so on. So I think that's the challenge that maybe a lot of brands have when they're going from being like a big bedroom brand to like actually a big brand, which takes a lot of time and requires you hitting that mass appeal, particularly in the UK, because we are like 90% focused on the UK right now. And I think you can get to 10 to 15 million a year just in the UK with this product. You definitely can't get to 100 million, which is why you'd have to go to America if you want to go like huge level like that. But yeah, where was I going with that? I suppose it's all just testing and knowing your audience and looking at the data really. But I'm also still very much figuring out my audience, because when I launched the product, I just made it for me. I thought it would be like just kind of like entrepreneur bros that would try it, like kind of biohacker types. Whereas actually like the loudest segment of our customers in terms of the ones that write the best reviews, that email saying they love it and shit, is genuinely like middle-aged women that have got anxiety, which is maybe not surprising in hindsight, but kind of surprised me a little bit. I mean, maybe it makes sense. It's like a pink brand. It's arguably slightly feminine, although you can't say that anymore because it's 2023. But yeah, I'm always learning about our customer base, really. And we do a lot of surveys, like post-purchase surveys to our email list and so on. And it's actually a pretty not gender neutral, but we're like 50-50 male-female in terms of our customer base. Whereas I maybe thought it would be more guys, because a lot of our early marketing was kind of like entrepreneur focused. Whereas now it's a bit more holistic and wholesome.
That kind of does make sense. I always think with every product there'll be a surprising demographic. And I interviewed Liv, who's the founder of Trip.
Yeah.
And she said this thing about how, because CBD back in 2019, I remember going to a trade show, it was like, it either looked like you're trying to sell pharmaceutical stuff, or like someone's trying to be like fucking Snoop Dogg and sell some weird brand like that. Do you know what I mean? It was this weird thing. And what Trip did so well is they kind of stole the cues of other categories, as the kind of the way of saying it is, they got all these kind of these pastel colours, these soft colours, and it basically allowed them to open up the market or their product to people who were interested in having something to calm them down. Yeah. Whereas before, like, as you say, Karen from Basingstoke is not going to pick up something that has any reference to pot. Do you know what I mean? So exactly. I think it's interesting. But
similar idea. I reference CBD a lot, to be fair, when I'm trying to explain the concept of mushrooms, because I feel like, granted, functional mushrooms and magic mushrooms are very different things, but mushrooms on the whole, I think, are quite similar to CBD in the earlier days, where it used to be very, I guess I would associate like CBD, or a lot of people would, with kind of just like people smoking weed in their mum's basement. They'd be like, well, CBD, is that just like weed? Whereas obviously it's not the same product, but also now it's like you get middle-aged affluent women in their Range Rover dropping CBD. And I think Trip have obviously led the charge for that in the UK. But I think it's similar with mushrooms, and hopefully psychedelics long-term. Is like massive stigma around it, kind of seen as like dodgy. Even now, like my own parents like won't try my product because they're like, oh, it's mushrooms. Is that going to make me lose my mind? And I'm like, well, no, but okay.
Mate, your product arrives, and my mum, I'm living at home at the minute, and my mum was like, what the fuck is that? Like, are you taking shrooms? I was like, oh,
exactly. So shrooms has this sort of vibe around like recreational drugs, whereas the reality is it's fundamentally just adaptogens that ease stress and make you feel better. So
what are your views on competition? So I know you've got like, I think there's Dirty in the market. There's that Lion's Mane. Lion's Mane's a mushroom. Sorry, mate. There's another brand.
There's a lot of competitors now.
What are your views on
Dirty? I mean, there was a lot less when I launched, which is good and bad. I mean, it's good because you're early, but it's also bad because it attracts a lot of competition. When a few brands start like popping up everywhere and clearly doing like decent revenue. I mean, Dirty were before me. To be honest, I don't know if they listen to this, but Dirty are really the only competitor I kind of look at and I'm like, fuck, I want to beat these cunts. Because, not that they're cunts, but, you know, just so to speak. I know they've raised a lot more money than I have, about 10 times as much. Pretty sure they're a bit bigger than me right now, to be honest. They've been around about a year or more longer. They've got a much bigger team. The shit that annoys me is brands that pop up literally copying my website word for word, which there are a few. I've got a list of them on like a Google sheet. But I guess with that stuff...
Such as, if you're all right to disclose, or...
What's the one? In fact, I'll name the one that's an exact rip and everyone can Google it. VarietyMode.com. And it's called Gold Dust. And the website is literally... The exact formulation is a rip, which not really much I can do about that. But like, it's just... Have some fucking uniqueness, please. Like, word for word, the website is completely ripped. We actually updated our website like a month ago. So their entire website is based on my old website. But anyone that looks at that, you'll see exactly what I mean. It's just, the whole thing's just an exact rip. Even the imagery is like, they just sent my images to their designer and said, rip that. They've actually ripped my nutrition table from the website and put it on theirs, which I thought was quite funny. But, you know, I think brands like that generally are quite small or won't last very long, but it does piss me off when people just straight up, because it's the opposite of entrepreneurial creativity, when you just do a straight rip. I mean, it should be illegal, but it's not really. So, yeah, I think the mushroom space is definitely getting more competitive, but that every space does. And that's why you've got to be, I guess, on the top of your game and stay ahead. I also think that competition is a good thing in a way, though, because it proves more mass adoption. And it, you know, the more people that can see mushrooms, the more people that can try it for the first time and then eventually buy from my brand or buy from another brand, which generally raises the bar for every brand. So, and I think, you know, it's literally impossible to not have competition. Like, everything is competitive. You just got to choose a market and be better than your competitors, or at least be different or better in your own way. So yeah, some competitors really piss me off, but some of them, it's probably a good thing to have them in the market because it's proof that this isn't going away.
It grows the category for you. In terms of so we talked about like the creative and the user generated content. As you say, you've been doing this for so long, mate, and you've got this. You're in this 0.01% of your pals who are smashed in D2C. What is from that circle? Like, what would you say are 2 principles about business or life that you've learned from this higher echelon of people that probably most people won't know? Like, what would you say 1 or 2 principles are that could really help our listeners? Could be about anything.
I think the first one is obvious, but just work harder and smarter than everyone else. I just think at the end of the day, 99% of people are probably clocking off at 5 p.m. every day and they're not working weekends. And I actually don't, I subscribe to that way less than I used to, by the way. So I used to be like, if I'm not working, then someone else is outworking me and I'm never going to not be working all the time. I actually try and take more time off than I used to because it's genuinely bad for your mental health. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are just quite soft, if I'm completely honest. Like, we live in a bit of a snowflake society these days, I think. I think everyone should run a marathon or something just to see what they're actually capable of. And I think I get that work ethic from when I used to row as a kid. So I used to be on a freezing river at 6 a.m. when I was 11 years old, and I ended up becoming national champion and all this. And while that's no big achievement now, when I was 16, that was my entire life because it taught me the value of working hard at something for a prolonged period of time and suffering where you need to. In that case, my legs would be burning in a boat and I'd have bleeding knuckles from rowing in the fucking ice cold. And I don't know, I think we live in this society where everyone wants everything now. They want the Lamborghini now, but they don't want to work for 10 years to get it. They want to raise a load of money because they don't want the balls to bootstrap anything to begin with. So I think that's probably the first thing. And I'm not for a minute saying I work harder than everyone else, because I think, particularly in 2023, I think a lot of people are probably finding life and the economy quite difficult right now, whether they're working 9 to 5 or a startup. So like, I think we're all in it together in that respect, you know, at least people that, you know, don't come from shed loads of money, which is 99% of people. I think the other thing is just actually building a fundamental skill set across a large range of things, because you have to be you have to be really good at a lot of things, I think, to be, I would say this, but just to be competent in D2C, there's a lot of moving parts and you have to do a lot yourself to start with. So you have to have some level of competence in product development, branding, digital marketing. Like, there's nothing in the business I couldn't do entirely myself if I had to. And there isn't anything in the business that at day one I didn't do entirely myself. And that's as far as customer service, web design, literally media buying in the ad accounts, finance to some extent. I don't do most of these things myself anymore, but you know, if the whole world, you know, went to shit and it was me and a laptop with 10 quid to start again, I could do it because I have that skill set to go from 0 to 1. And yeah, I think it comes back to the initial point. It's like, I think a lot of people just aren't willing to be shit at something and get better at it. Because my first ever brand, I had a t-shirt brand called Gentry Club when I was 17 or 18. And it was literally a white t-shirt that I got from Gildan with a fucking shit logo stitched on it. And everyone in school laughed at me and took the piss. And I went to bed crying. And I sold 300 quid in the first year. And I spent $3,000 on stock when I was working in Waitrose part-time on £4.17 an hour. So most people aren't willing to be that loser that spent all his summer wages on stock and didn't sell anything because he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. Because it's not very fun. Like, it looks fun when you say, oh, we're doing millions in revenue. I don't have to have a job on the side. I live in a nice flat, all this shit. But most people aren't willing, or certainly they don't see the years in anyone's case of self-education and chipping away at stuff. I mean, I would argue that I've been doing this a lot longer than a lot of people, to the extent that like, that's probably why I feel like I should be further ahead in some ways, because I've been doing it like full time for like nearly 6 years. But it's also taught me a lot, and 6 years is quite a long time. So yeah, I just think anyone that wants to start something, just fucking start something on the side, be really shit at it for probably a few years and gradually get better. And you know, the best time to start something was yesterday or 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
I love that. I've got that. I love that phrase. It's the best time to plant a tree was, I think it's yesterday or 20 years ago. Yeah, I love that phrase. So
I wish I'd invested in Bitcoin in 2013, right? But I didn't have any money in 2013, so I couldn't.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I'll be saying the same thing about D2C in 2033. Oh, I wish I'd started in 2023. So here we are.
No, for sure. So in terms of, say everything does go fucking peak Tom tomorrow, you've got a tenner, you've got your laptop, and I say, like, you've got to get a brand, a food and drink brand, whether or not that's Spacegoods or not, to 100 grand in revenue per month. What are the steps you take?
So I always say you can lose money, but if you do the right thing, it's very hard to lose experience or your network. And as long as you keep your integrity intact throughout, then you'll probably be all right. Because I mean, I guess the first thing I would do in that case is I'd probably go and raise some money off my network. But if I didn't have that, I'd probably get on TikTok and, well, I think it'd be impossible to start with £10, by the way, just to be completely honest. I think if you want to start a CPG brand of any kind, or just a D2C brand, unless you're drop shipping like borderline scam products from China, I think you need at least a few grand, like probably £5,000, just to even be like remotely viable. So let's just say that first. But from there, I would probably get on TikTok and crack organic. I mean, I'm working with like this 21-year-old guy right now who's running our TikTok organic, because we haven't cracked it in like the first year. And when I say crack it, I mean, there's brands getting millions of views organically, which obviously the beauty of that is you're not paying for that. Granted, it's not as targeted as paid Instagram ads, but you know, now we've got videos getting a few 100,000 views, and we're trying to build like TikTok organic into a nice kind of secondary ad channel that obviously we're not paying for. So other than the cost of making the content, it's entirely free to go and get a video viral. You just have to keep trying until you can get a video viral. So yeah, I mean, I'd probably do something that was one SKU, so one product to start with, to keep it simple. I would make the content myself, and I would get on TikTok and crack the organic piece, because there are brands that are doing that, particularly kind of founder-led ones, where the founder is the face of the brand.
Such as,
I mean, I've seen this Muslim, quite unique niche, this, don't know if the right way to say it, this halal supplement brand, another guy that runs that, and he's just cracked organic because it's a really strong niche, so he's got a really big audience on there. So that's one example. I've seen quite a lot of beauty brands doing it. In fact, well, one example, this girl I've recently been dating, actually, she's a bit of an entrepreneur herself. So she has a lash studio in Guildford. So she does like eyelashes for people, but she also started selling products to her customers, and she built like a TikTok community. So now she's doing like 6 figures organically, just selling eyelash stuff. So that's another good example. Don't know if she'll listen to that and get the shout out, but I thought that was pretty cool. So I actually think it's probably quite easy to get a brand to like 100 grand a year in revenue with like no ads at all. Whether there's any margin left there is different, but it's definitely way harder to scale to like multi-millions and 10 million plus in revenue. Like, you definitely need a solid strategy of where you're going to spend money, and you probably need to raise some money in this market realistically to even do that, or start with like a decent amount of cash, just in terms of ad spend, stock, etc. But
how do most brands with D2C piss away their margin? Because I know, again, I'm coming to this almost from the opposite to you, mate. Like, I know how in retail you can easily piss away money and you end up with fuck all left in the pot, right? But in D2C, from someone with like more of a retail background, I've always looked at it as this thing of like, if you can crack it, it's like the enigma, because obviously you've got the cost of sending it to the customer, the cost of getting the customer, but then other than that, it's just the cost of the 3PL. Like, is there ways that were like watch outs where people can piss away money?
Yeah, I've got a hard stop in like 10 minutes, by the way. So we're just like 5 to 4. I'm gonna have to go. Yeah, I would say. I think two things. Firstly, not knowing your true margin, because it's always less than you think. Because fulfillment, payment processing fees, fixed overheads that you probably don't realize that just rack up so easily. Even just shit like paying VAT. A lot of people just don't account for that when they're starting a business, which is, I mean, I've been guilty of that when I was like 21. I didn't know what the fuck VAT was. And it's such a huge part of your margin, particularly when you're selling to UK customers. So just knowing your actual margin, I think, is the first thing, because I guarantee it's less than you think when you account for everything, just on a basic gross margin level. But then the other biggest variable cost is marketing. So if your CAC goes up, then overnight you could go from having a profitable business to having a loss-making business. And it depends what the strategy is. If you're growing a subscription business like I am, where you're definitely more focused on growth than you are on having a really great EBITDA margin, and you've raised a bit of money, so it's budgeted for, then I would say that's the other thing. And it also depends. I think being clear on what the goal is, which is where I've had to have a bit of introspection myself, is like, are you trying to build a brand that does 300 grand a year revenue, makes 60k profit, and you're making a bit more money than you could in your day job, and it gives you location and time freedom and happy days? Or are you trying to build a business that's doing 10 mil revenue, makes $1 million profit, that you could potentially sell for 10 million quid in a few years' time? Which, by the way, is probably the ideal. I think that's way fucking harder to do than it was in 2019. And I know a lot of people that were doing that now are struggling to even make a profit, largely because ad costs have gone up. The economy has definitely turned a little bit. Or are you trying to do what I'm probably leaning towards myself, which is figure out the best way to build a category leader, which probably means raising a load of money and throwing money on the marketing machine while there's an opportunity in the market and the competition is relatively limited. So I think a lot of people, including myself, maybe historically, aren't entirely clear on what the goal is when they're starting a business, because it will be way more painful than you thought it would be. And I do generally think entrepreneurs are definitely mentally ill. I mean, I definitely am, for just wanting to do it in the first place, but even more so for continuing to do it when probably every sign was telling me to stop and fucking do something else 2 years ago. But I think that's the stubbornness that comes with being an actual entrepreneur that's doing it for the love of the game deep down, rather than what they think are the Instagram trophies that they probably will never get along the way anyway, such as the Lambo and the fucking Rolex.
Definitely. Final question, Max. Now you've got to run. So I think I'll put a link to your YouTube and your podcast in the show notes, especially for people who want to learn more about D2C. It's a sick podcast. You've actually interviewed my very good mate, Jack Rubin. I love that episode. I thought that was really good.
Oh, yeah. I've actually got a call with him tomorrow. He's
really?
He's way smarter than me.
He's a G. He's a G. Yeah, me and him used to do a lot of, had a lot of good nights out in Nottingham when you went to uni there. But you've grown that channel you've grown your podcast to like 8,000 on YouTube, which I think is sick. So I'm about to go into YouTube for this podcast. So I think it's a good distribution channel. How the fuck do you get to 1,000? I just want to get to 1,000, but I don't know where to start. Like, what are the things you got to get down to get it?
Well, I mean, with the podcast, I never even look at the numbers, to be honest. I started making it because I wanted to, and I interviewed a lot of my mates, and then it became this thing. I think the reason it built, I guess it's quite a big following for such a niche podcast. Like, I've literally been stopped in like Italy from people that watch the podcast and said, "Oh, he's fucking changed my life and shit," which is quite nice. But I also laugh because it's like, I'm not remotely famous at all on YouTube or the podcast world, but I guess for the niche, it's decent. I mean, I think what I did well was just being outrageously authentic, because I think so many people are just trying to be a version of, I'm not saying you're doing this, but just in general, they've started a fucking YouTube channel or whatever because they want to be the next Steve Bartlett or whatever, but they're not Steve Bartlett, and they should really try and be the first of them rather than just like emulating what everyone else has done. So even just shit like, it became a bit of a meme and a thing on my podcast that we basically got pissed on red wine. I'm trying to do that less now because I'm also trying to cut out drink. But every episode was on my fucking sofa that my dog had pissed on, with a pink light in the background and red wine. It was just quite a unique format. And I don't think anyone had done that, or even has still really done that with like legit entrepreneurs. And also everyone that came on had actually built a sick business, and most of them didn't have a following. So it was like really refreshing, I think, to a lot of people, because they'd never seen those sort of people put out content, like myself as well as my guests, most of which are way more impressive than me. So
no, it's sick. I like, and yeah, I think you and Ruben were having gin and tonics, I think, when I watched that one.
Yeah, we definitely got pretty wavy on that one. That was about a year ago, I think.
But then in terms of, was that just being consistent with YouTube, or like how are you driving traffic to YouTube?
Yeah, I mean,
so I've looked at all this shit about like SEO, like is it needed,
honestly,
is it not?
I probably should do all that shit. I've never even done a custom thumbnail on half the videos. It's just like fucking filmed on an iPhone screenshot. I think I was pretty consistent. I think with guests, I've done 70 odd episodes, and about 50 of those were like every week in a row. And then I took a bit of a break from it and went back to it and so on. I'm trying to pick it up again now, actually, but I feel like I've almost the same with the brand. I feel like I lost the inspiration of the start of the podcast, because nothing ever feels as fresh as right at the start. And then I also did have I had one episode that got like over 100,000 views, which was with this quite well-known guy that's now got like 3 million subscribers. So I should probably do that way more tactically. The problem is most people I want to speak to don't even have followers. They're just people that have built great businesses, and you would never know about them unless you were like autistically interested in founders like I am. So that's also a bit of a dilemma with it, because if you want to grow it, you got to go mainstream and probably just get some cunt influencer on, to be honest. Yeah. But I just also don't want to do that, because the whole premise of the pod was like authentic, real conversations with actual founders, most of which are basically ghosts and pretty anonymous. So it's a double-edged sword. Do I just get some OnlyFans model on and try and get 1 million views to grow the audience? Or do I just stick to like really sick founders that 99.99% of the world will probably never even know about?
For sure. Yeah. Right. Final question, mate. And this is a personal one. As I say, I'm trying to cut out the booze. But what is your like routine in terms of like the health? Because as you said, the phoenix rose from the ashes. You're now like doing that. What's your like routine in terms of like fitness and building that into building the brand while still staying sane?
Yeah. I mean, last year I went through the biggest transformation physically I've ever had. Like, I used to be a rower for like 10 years, so I was always really fit. And then I got a bit fat during COVID, probably like a lot of people. Then I started running last year. I got obsessed with running, basically. So I was always going to the gym, lifting weights, but I did no cardio. I was eating a bit shit, so I was kind of chubby. And then I just got in like the best shape ever last summer. Like, I was ridiculously shredded. Ran like a 2-hour 52 marathon, which everyone said I couldn't do. That was like a year ago now. So I feel like I've also fallen off a bit since then. I'm into like CrossFit quite a bit now. I'm running an ultra marathon like next month. So for me, running was really good, but I quite like the mental and physical suffering of endurance stuff. So it's not for everyone, but I definitely think that helped me a lot.
Are you doing that every day?
Yeah, pretty much. I train like every day, yeah.
And is that like a set time, or is it like whenever you fancy it, or what's the...
I'm honestly trying to figure out like a new routine right now, because typically I train in the afternoon, but the problem with that is people generally work like 9 till 5 or 9 till 6. So I kind of find myself not working with other people's routines as well if I'm doing that. So, but at the same time, I find like fitness, and I really want to do High Rocks. I don't know if you heard of that. It's like this new kind of CrossFit-esque fitness competition, because I'm pretty fucking fit, to be fair. Like I just enjoy it, and I'm naturally got quite a good engine on me, I suppose. But also just, I think staring at a screen all day is really bad for your mental health, and I definitely struggle with that still a lot. And I actually want to spend less time working on the business and be way more effective in the time that I am spending on it. Because I think I'm very guilty of just looking at a screen thinking I'm being productive, whereas actually like 6 hours of deep work is probably better than 15 hours of fucking clicking between 25 different internet tabs. So,
mate, absolute pleasure, Matt. I'll put a link to Spacegoods. I think everyone should check it out, and we have a lot of retailers and buyers that listen to this podcast. So yeah, if you're looking for something new to shake up your category,
definitely trying to scale into retail. So we're in Holland and Barrett, but I really want to be in Walmart, to be honest. So
yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, mate.
Pleasure.